Hello, NetSuite community. My name is Chidi Okwudire, and I lead the technology practice at Prolecto. I'm very delighted that you've chosen to join me in this tutorial, in which I will show you step by step how to connect your NetSuite account to ChatGPT or Claude, allowing you to try out the latest features NetSuite has announced in the area of AI. I must say that these are exciting features for which anyone working with NetSuite, regardless of your role, should be aware of what's happening in the space. And so my intention with this tutorial is to help you get set up. I must mention that this tutorial is a companion to an article that I've written and published on the Prolecto blog, where I walk through the basic concepts of AI and NetSuite's current state. It's important, if you have not read that article yet, for you to do so, because it will give you some background that would help you better appreciate what we're trying to do. That said, you do not need any specific AI knowledge or any specialized NetSuite knowledge to follow this tutorial, because we'll walk through every step and explain the basic concepts that you need to understand. All you need is a NetSuite account and a ChatGPT or Claude account, and we'll guide you through the rest of the process. So why don't we get started? All right, before we get started, here's an outline of the things we'll be covering in this tutorial. First, we will go over the prerequisites to make sure you have everything you need to get through to the end of the process. Then we will configure the NetSuite side of things, after which we'll configure ChatGPT and Claude. And then we'll do some tests in which I will show you some of the differences between the settings available in ChatGPT and Claude, just to give you a sense of what to expect. And then finally, I'll share some thoughts and pointers to other things that could be helpful to you in your journey. In terms of prerequisites, we just expect you to have access to a NetSuite account that you're going to be connecting to, preferably access with an admin role, because we'll be enabling features and creating roles which might not be available to other roles in the account. On the other hand, for ChatGPT or Claude, we need a paid account. So this won't work, unfortunately, with any of the free accounts. You would need to be on the Plus or Pro individual account for ChatGPT or an enterprise version. And similarly, on the Claude side, you need to be on the Pro or Max or some enterprise offering. So if you don't have a subscription at this point, it's important that you take a moment and get subscribed. Hopefully, you can get a free trial if you just want to test things out in the first place. Now, before we go into the NetSuite configuration, I want to point you to a few resources that are going to be important in this journey. First of all, I want to point you to NetSuite's documentation on the NetSuite AI connector. Really, it contains pretty much all that you need to connect to NetSuite, and most of the things we're going to show in this tutorial are based on the descriptions here. However, there are a few details that are not covered, and this is a continuously evolving space. So it's possible that at the point you watch this video, some things might have changed, in which case it's always going to be a good idea to come back to this page and see what the latest steps are. Another thing I'd like to point you to is the website that describes the Model Context Protocol. I'll spend just a minute on this to make sure we're all on the same page. Again, remember that there's an article where I go into more detail. The Model Context Protocol is a protocol, so a set of instructions and specifications that allow AI applications such as ChatGPT, Claude, IDEs, etc., to connect to external systems, in our case, NetSuite. But this protocol can be used with any system that basically implements the specification. So this could be Google, Slack. You see a few examples here. Of course, we are going to be focusing on connecting ChatGPT and Claude to NetSuite, but I just want to highlight that the protocol is not something NetSuite specific. It's something generic for the AI world and allows AI applications and business systems or data sources to be connected to each other. This website does a good job of describing what MCP is, the architecture, the client-server architecture, and all that kind of information. It will be useful for developers, but also for non-developers, people just trying to understand the protocol. So I highly recommend that you take a look at it at some point. Now let's get started with the NetSuite configuration. There are three aspects to this. First, we need to enable a few features in NetSuite account. And then we're going to install the MCP Standard Tools SuiteApp, and we'll need to configure at least one role that we'll use to connect the AI applications to NetSuite. There are two features that need to be enabled in your NetSuite account, and to get there, you go to Setup, Company, Enable Features. On that page, you would navigate to the Suite Cloud subtab, and there you want to make sure that the Server SuiteScript feature is enabled. Similarly, you want to enable the feature for OAuth 2.0. This allows the AI application to connect securely to your NetSuite account. Finally, since we'll be using the MCP SuiteApp, we need to also enable the REST web services, because that SuiteApp uses this feature for some of the tools that it exposes and some of the calls it makes into NetSuite. So really those three things are all you need to enable: Server SuiteScript, OAuth 2.0, and the REST web services if you're using the NetSuite standard MCP Tools SuiteApp. I'll go ahead and save that, and we're good to go in terms of features. All right, the next step will be to install the MCP Standard Tools SuiteApp. And for that, we'll go to the SuiteApp section of the account. Again, if you don't see this menu, then most likely you're in a role that doesn't have permissions, but in the admin role, you'll be fine and you should see everything. Here, I'm just going to type MCP, and there you go. We find the MCP Standard Tools SuiteApp. I'll go ahead and install it in this account. This SuiteApp is offered by NetSuite itself, and it does offer a few features which we would talk about a bit later, but these allow us to allow AI applications like ChatGPT and Claude to connect to NetSuite and perform actions, including retrieving data or even creating records. And as you can see here, create a record, update record. These are effectively tools that NetSuite exposes out of the box to allow ChatGPT and Claude perform actions or to get you started. I'll go ahead and install it. Installation will take a few moments, and once it's done, we'll be ready to use the SuiteApp. But there are a few more steps we need to do. The next one being configuring a role that will be used to connect ChatGPT and Claude to your NetSuite account. Now, if you're not familiar with NetSuite's role permission system, NetSuite is a multi-role system, meaning a user can have one or more roles. Each role has a set of permissions that define what can be done from that role. And so it's important that as we are configuring our connectors, that we decide upfront what kind of actions we want the AI agents to be able to do. Do we want them to be able to read transactions? Do we want them to be able to view vendors, create vendors? You have to carefully think, just like when you're going live with NetSuite, you have to think about your role system and your structure before you connect. It's a bad practice to try to just give all permissions so that everything is easy. Instead, what I recommend is thinking about your use cases upfront and granting the roles as you need them. This is considered the principle of least privileges, where you start with the most limited set of permissions and you gradually add permissions as you go. To create roles, we'll go to Setup, Users and Roles, Manage Roles. Out of the box, you have a couple of roles that you can start with. And so typically one may take an existing role and customize it, but it's also possible to start from scratch and create a net new role. Just for the sake of demonstration, I'll go ahead and I'll start with one of the roles. Let's say our use case is around AP. So we want to do things with vendors and maybe retrieve information about vendors, purchase orders, etc. Then a starting point, a good starting point could be the AP clerk role. So I'll go ahead and I'll open this role, and then I will clone it and add the permissions needed as for the AI connector. So the first thing I'll do is call this AI connector AP clerk, something like that. Typically, you might have the name of your company in front of it. So let's just call it PRI AI connector, and let's say AP, maybe clerk is a bit too specific. So the next thing I'll do is save these roles because I don't want to override the existing role. I'll save as. And so that role should now be on my list. There you go, my PRI AR AI connector AP role. We have a role now, and so the next thing will be to decide on which features or what we want to expose. Again, because I started with an existing role, it's going to have some things pre-selected, but in terms of thinking of the principle of least privileges, we want to go down and strip it down to the minimum we need. The first thing to mention, though, is that there are a few preferences that NetSuite requires that any role connecting to AI should have. And those are the MCP server connection. And the only option there is full, so we accept that. And the second one is OAuth 2.0. So it's called login using OAuth 2.0 access tokens. So don't be confused that with the login using access tokens. It has to be the one for OAuth 2.0. So these are required permissions for any connection from the outside world. If you don't grant these two permissions, then when you try to connect to your ChatGPT or Claude to NetSuite, effectively you won't find any role that is suitable. So we have to make sure we have these two. Once we have them, I can go ahead and remove things that I don't need at this point because I want to keep this as lean as possible. So if I look here at list, well, I want to be able to view vendors. I just said that because I'm looking at the AP world. But for the rest, I'm going to just strip down things that I don't care about. At this point, I don't want any transact. I don't want to see the register. I want the calendar. You get what I mean? You can get this to your liking, but I'm going to start small. Now, there are a few things that I'll keep there, like perform search. That's important because we want to be able to perform safe searches. In terms of reports, maybe I want to see some AP reports. So I'm just going to keep all of this as view for now. I take that out. I don't want anything that is not view only as I'm starting this journey. I want to make sure that everything I'm doing is view only. So I have the AP reports, maybe inventory, purchase orders. I'll take off the sales things too. Transactions. I don't want to be able to build purchase orders, but I want to be able to see vendor bills associated with my vendors. I don't want to be able to create anything in my in this first step. So let's see. I want to view credits. That's okay. Find transactions. That's fine. Item receipts. Well, let's view pay bills. Posting period and transactions. That's good to have. Purchase orders. I want view only access for now. Receive orders. We don't want to do that. We don't want anything about approvals at this point. Maybe VRA is just in case, all tied to the vendor, so that's okay. And vendor returns, view. Right, you get a sense of what we're trying to do here. You could specify the subsidiary scope and other parameters, but the key thing is to create a role that has the least privileges and start with that. And so you're going to have everything in view access at the view access level first, except the ones where the only option you have is full. In this case, find transactions is actually allowing me set, so I'll keep that as full. But for the rest, I've stripped it down to view access only. Custom records, I really don't want to have anything here, so I'm going to just go ahead and clean this out. You could argue that it would have been faster for me to start with just a blank row and set the permissions. You can go that way, but I just wanted to illustrate the process using an existing role. So I think we're good to go now. In the setup area, we have just the two permissions we need. We've stripped down the rest to just a few things, and we can always add permissions as we go. And so now I'll go ahead and save the role. This is not the next step I'm going to do is not really tied to AI, but it's a generally recommended practice that when you create roles, you give them meaningful IDs. Your developers will love you, and there's other value in this. So I'm going to call it AI Connector AP, and that should do our piece of setting up NetSuite. In the next part, we're going to now go into ChatGPT and see if we can establish connection from ChatGPT into the NetSuite account. Stay tuned. The next step is to connect ChatGPT to our NetSuite account now that we've set up the role permissions. Before we do that, I want to point out two things. First of all, although we created a role in NetSuite, I didn't assign that role to anybody. And so the first thing I need to do is to assign the role to myself. Otherwise, when I try to connect to NetSuite, it wouldn't find any suitable role. So that's a key step. After we create the role, we need to make sure the role is assigned to whichever users we want to have access to this functionality. And this is standard basic practice in NetSuite. Roles get created, they get assigned to users. A user can have multiple roles. And in this case, if we had multiple AI roles, we would also grant them to the users we care about. So I'll come in here and I'll look for my PRI AI connector AR role, and I'll grant that access to myself. Once I've done that, we can head over to ChatGPT to get the connection set up. I have a ChatGPT Plus account, and so I have what I need to get going. You click on your name on the icon that represents your name there and go into settings. Under the settings, we want to go to apps and connectors. If you don't see a create button here, the first thing you need to do is scroll all the way to the bottom under advanced settings and enable developer mode. In developer mode, ChatGPT allows us to create custom connections in addition to the ones that come out of the box. So you can see that there are a couple of connections that come out of the box, but we want to do a connection to NetSuite, which is not out of the box. So click on create, and it's going to ask us to name the tool and possibly put in a description. Why don't we call this our NetSuite connector? And just to distinguish, because I could connect multiple accounts, I would like to include the account ID that I'm connecting to. The account ID is also going to be needed later on, so we can go ahead and get it. The account ID is usually in the URL, but just to make sure that you are getting the right ID, especially in Sandbox, there's a slight difference there. You want to go up to setup company information, and there you get your account ID the way it's needed. So I'm going to go back into ChatGPT and I'm just going to say NetSuite that account. I'll skip the description. You can put in whatever you want to have there. The next key thing is the MCP server URL. Now going back to NetSuite's help page, under the section Connect to AI to NetSuite AI Connector Service, it describes the steps of connecting Claude and ChatGPT. And on this page, we see that there is a URL format that is expected. You have your account ID, which we need to replace with our value right now. And if you only want to connect to the standard NetSuite MCP Standard Tools SuiteApp, then you need this URL. Only thing we need to do there is replace our account ID. What this would do would expose only the tools that are in the standard MCP SuiteApp. However, that could be limiting because if you have developers who have created tools in your account, or you have a third-party vendor who is offering you a SuiteApp that has extra tools, limiting your scope just to the MCP standard tools will mean that those tools will be visible in your chat application. The alternative is to either target such applications by their ID or to use the URL that targets all available tools, including those you've built yourself, those from third parties, and the standard tools. In this case, I'll go with this approach because in the future, I want to be able to access other tools as well. But if you're going again by the most restrictive approach, you would want to choose just the MCP standard tools. And then later on, when you have a different connector, you can go in and set the URL accordingly. So let's, like I said here, go with all. I'm going to put that in, and then don't forget to replace the first part with your account ID, because that's the placeholder. That's my account ID. We choose the authentication method OAuth because NetSuite requires that the connection from AI applications into NetSuite be authenticated. And OAuth is another protocol, a standard protocol that allows applications to authenticate with other applications. And so this is one of the security features in this model where you can't just connect without really authenticating. So I'll go ahead and I will say I accept and I want to connect, and then I create the connector. Once that's done, the next thing it asks me is to try to connect. The next thing it tries to do is to connect to the account. By default, it tried to connect to the administrator role, which I created before, but as I mentioned in the article, and it's also in the help document, NetSuite does not allow you connect AI agents via the administrator role because that has too many permissions. You have to choose a role with less privileges and one that has those two permissions that we set up earlier on. So I'm going to say choose another role. And in this case, you can see that it actually doesn't find a role I can connect with. That's because I assigned the role to myself, but I need to log out and log into NetSuite for that to take effect. So what I'll do is I'll go back and I'll log out of NetSuite and log back in so that that new role becomes visible. These are some of the things you might run into when you're trying to connect. I'm going to try again. Okay, I see that it doesn't find it yet. So I'll just cancel this session and start it afresh. Okay, we go back. The good thing is it will preserve the connector we created. It's just not connected yet. So there's our connector. When I click on connect now, it's going to let me go forward and I expect to see my role there. There you go. My PRI AI connector AP role is now there. So again, just pausing here, troubleshooting. If you didn't find your role, it's probably one of three things. One, maybe you didn't grant those two permissions to the role that you're trying to use, in which case it won't show up on the list. Two, it might be that you granted the permissions, but you forgot to assign the role to the user that you're trying to authenticate via. And then three, like you saw, if you granted the access to the user in the same session, you need to log out and log back into NetSuite for that permission, for that role to be visible. And so now I'll go ahead and I will connect to the NetSuite account under that role. You get some information here that you need to accept. And once we do that, if everything goes well, our NetSuite account and my ChatGPT instance are now connected via a specific role. And there you go, it was connected successfully. It shows us the URL we connected via. Again, I chose the all variant, and it shows us the tools that are available. These are tools that NetSuite has built and is giving us out of the box to list reports, save searches, run SuiteKill. You can see from the names and you can tell pretty much what these allow you to do. Now, the important thing to mention is that these tools are still restricted by the permissions you have on the role. So for example, we're going to see later on that if I try to create a vendor, it should fail. It will fail because the role I have only has view access to vendors. And so don't be deceived by the list of actions. You have to have the right permissions in NetSuite. That's another security feature that is built into this model so that you can control what the AI applications can do in your account by giving the right permissions. Okay, I'll go ahead and just refresh this. It feels like I'm missing a few options, but maybe it's just the way the view is shown. I expect the tools to be the tools for creating records, etc. But I think that's just a thing of the view here. Once I have that ready, really my basic connection for ChatGPT is done. It will be important then to try out the connection and see if it works. So I'll click on this plus icon and now I can select my connection, and this tells the application that I want it to take this connection into account when it's responding to my prompt. And so I can then ask it something very simple. Show me the most recently created vendor. And now what we see is that NetSuite, ChatGPT is smart enough, seeing that I'm connected to the NetSuite connector here, it goes and it discovers the tools that are available. This is part of what the MCP protocol specifies. Notice that I didn't tell it, go use this tool or that tool. I just asked it for something. And then it did the reasoning to say, well, given this request, what does it mean? What tools are available? And the first thing it did is it went and it ran a SuiteQL query to find out what vendors might be there. Well, it came up with a SuiteQL query that did not work, most likely because the SuiteQL is not correct. I'm not quite sure. It did have an error. Yes, because it added a column created date, which is not valid for the vendor. And then what did it do next? It went in and it realized, oh, I made a mistake with created date, so I'm going to call it date created instead. This is the power of this approach. The AI tool the AI application, is able to go in and discover what's accessible based on the request, make calls, and in this case, the first call it made wasn't right, but based on the feedback it got from the first call, it corrected its query and it went back into the account and now it got a result. And just looking at this query, I'm pretty sure that this is a good query because it's looking at the vendor table, it's ordering by date created descending, and so it would find me one of the most recent vendors, the exact last vendor. If I had multiple vendors created on the same day, there might be a bit of confusion there, but if I was writing this query, I'll probably do another ordering by internal ID. But for all intents and purposes, this is a decent query that the chat application came up with, and it has given me some information about the vendor. And now it starts asking you things as you're used to. Do you want me to do more? Do you want me to get status? But all I wanted to do here is to confirm that I am able to connect to ChatGPT and that it's now able to get access to my account based on the permissions that I gave it. One more thing before I move away from here is around granting the AI applications or permission to use your data to train their models. Both ChatGPT and Claude have options to opt out, as it were, from this. So going back again to settings, under your data controls, you have this option that says improve model for everyone. It's turned on by default in this account, in individual accounts. And if you don't want your data to be used to train the models, you want to come in and turn this off. This is a feature you have accessible to you, but like we saw, it was turned on by default in this account. In enterprise accounts, you have more control over it, but this is one of the things you want to be cognizant of and settings you want to change as you work with the models. But there you go. Our connection to ChatGPT has been successful. Again, it doesn't say that this data it gave me is accurate. When you're using AI applications, it's important that you are able to validate the results you get. In this case, it's going to be a quick validation, really. If I were to go into the account, I should be able to go to my list of vendors and quickly see which vendor was most recently created to confirm that what we got back was right. I can't overemphasize the need to always check the outputs because assuming that things are right is a recipe for disaster. Okay, so when I look here, it did return this vendor, but I see actually that a tax agency got created later on. Now, I understand why this happened, and maybe it's worth spending a minute on this right now. When I created my role, I restricted it to one subsidiary, the Honeycomb manufacturing subsidiary. And so when that query got run, it was restricted by the permissions it had. And so given my role and the fact that my role is limited to this subsidiary, I only got the most recent vendor created in that subsidiary. If I go ahead and change my role to include all subsidiaries and rerun the query, I'm pretty sure it's going to get me this tax agency. So again, you can see how you have to be carefully thinking about what you're doing. The AI agent did the right thing, but the data was still wrong because my NetSuite configuration limited me to what it could bring back. And so this is a good example of that. But we can talk more about that possibly in a separate video. I think here I want to focus on just establishing connection and showing you the key elements. And so this wraps up our work with ChatGPT. We'll now switch over to setting up Claude in a similar fashion. Thank you. Okay, here we are in Claude, and we're going to try to connect it to our NetSuite account, just like we did for ChatGPT. Once again, a paid account is required. I'm in my Pro account, and so I'm going to go ahead and click on my name icon there, go to the settings, and look at connectors. So Claude offers two options. You can browse connectors and select web and type NetSuite, and they have an option where you connect to the NetSuite standard tools that we really are focused on in this video. However, I'll go the route of doing a custom connector because that will allow us connect to not just the standard tools, but also any other tools available. Plus, it gives me the opportunity to rename this connection to include my account ID, which I prefer in case I have multiple accounts connected. Once again, we saw the URL. Let me get that URL from ChatGPT, probably is the easiest. The same one we used last time to connect. Right, I have my URL. Again, I'm going for the variant that allows me to work with all tools, and the rest of it is not needed. We'll go through the same steps. I'll go ahead and connect. I'm not sure why it showed me that the second time, but I'll go ahead and connect to NetSuite. Choose the role. By now, we should be familiar with these steps. I'll go through them quickly. And there we go. We have a NetSuite custom connector. Now, one of the interesting differences between ChatGPT and Claude is that Claude gives us a bit more configuration options. So on the connector, it allows us to specify whether by default Claude can use all the tools that are available, or whether it needs to ask for permission each time it's trying to use a tool. So this gives us a bit more granular control. So if I say needs approval, that means each time the application is trying to use a tool, is going to force me to approve it before it goes ahead. In a similar way, we can actually prevent it from using certain tools. So in this case, if I leave this as needs approval, we see when I run the query, it's going to keep prompting me to allow it to use a tool, yes or no. Now, if you want to avoid that, you could just change this and say, always allow, so then it knows it can run the tools. Since we're trying to compare to what we did in ChatGPT, I'll go ahead and specify this. But this is one of those features in Claude that is a bit more advanced. It gives you a bit more granular control. Suppose you said, I never want to invoke, I never want you to run custom SuiteQL because that's kind of an open end. I want to be more specific. You could, disable it completely or ask it to give you control. But regardless, I'll go ahead now and leave it as allow all. So once I have that, I'm going to go and create a new chat. Similar to ChatGPT, I can add a connector, which would be the one I just created. Why is it not here? 1 second. Oh, sorry. I went in the convoluted. The connector is already here. It's already checked, so I didn't need to do that. And I'm gonna give it the exact same query I gave ChatGPT just for comparison, just to get a sense. Of course, we know that each model is different, and so we don't expect them to behave exactly the same way. But for such a simple query, I would expect similar behavior. So let's see what Claude does with my request to get the most recently created vendor. Again, similar ChatGPT, it did figure out that it needs to call the SuiteQL query. But there you go. We already see a difference. It produced a different query. It didn't make the mistake of created dates. And here it added just an extra piece here to get the first row. And so there you go. We got the same results pretty much. It gives the vendor name, ID, entity ID, and the date created. So we could say for both of them, despite slightly different queries, we ended up getting similar results. You can see here the ChatGPT tried to get the email address. Claude decided not to get email address, get the entity ID. These are just, again, qualities of the models and how they would interpret the request and decide what's important or not. But by shaping the prompt, there's a whole notion of prompt engineering. By shaping the prompt, we can get closer to the output we want. Now, I gave a very vague request, so I got a generally okay answer, but if I wanted to get specific fields, I would need to be more explicit about that. Again, this tutorial is not about what kind of prompts you want to be giving the chat application. In general, I wouldn't be using AI to ask for the most recent vendor because, like I showed in the UI in the ChatGPT demo, that's something I can easily check for. So thinking about the use cases is part of the whole process, but now I just want to confirm connection, which I have, and that's good enough. In terms of opting in or out for model training, I just want to point out that under the privacy tab, there is a similar option. Interestingly, in my Claude account, this was unchecked by default, and so it's not going to be using my charts to train the models. But if you see this checked in your account, you want to go ahead and turn it off if you don't want your data to be used for training the models. And so this completes our configuration for both ChatGPT and Claude. The steps are similar. Once you have your NetSuite site going, you can work with you can set up the connections as we saw. One more thing I want to highlight, and I had mentioned earlier that I was missing some tools, particularly the tools to create records, get metadata. And the reason for that is that in addition to enabling the web services feature, which we did at the beginning, the role itself also has to have the web services feature applied to it for these endpoints to be visible in the first place. And so that's something we didn't do. To get this working, we would need to go back into our NetSuite account and set up that, give that permission to the role. So I'm back in the administrator role, and so I'll go back to the role, and maybe this is a good way to see what happens when you update permissions and how to refresh the app. So let's go ahead and do that. It should be under setup, REST web services. I'll go ahead and grant this permission, and when I go back now to either Claude or ChatGPT, I'll try to refresh my connector and see what happens. Okay, under my settings, I'll look for the apps and connectors. There's my connection, and I'll do a refresh and see if it's going to find them right away or if I need to log out or log in. I would expect that it finds them right away. There you go. So now you see my create record, get record. I have now a list of more tools here, including writing. But like I said before, what I can do is governed by my permission. So what if I went ahead and I said, create a vendor named ChatGPT, and I just do that. I mean, the first thing is going to now try calling a tool, but I expect to come back with a permission error because my role doesn't allow me to create. I specifically limited my role to view only. So, okay, it did a few calls. It got record metadata to see what properties are required for a vendor. That's all good. And then it tried to create a vendor with some information. And what does it say? It gives me an option to confirm this action because I'm trying to do a create. So this is one of the things the MCP also exposes, a way to confirm actions before we take them, and that's generally good practice. So I would say confirm. At this point, it still thinks it's possible, so I've given permission to do it, but I expect now it's going to come back and say, hey, I don't have the right permissions to do it, but let's give it a moment and see what happens. Okay, I tried to create a vendor, but NetSuite permission error. You need a high permission for list vendors. And that's exactly what I would expect. So I can ask it for things that it shouldn't be able to do. And because the permission system is fully tied to this, it would prevent me from doing that. Good thing is it goes ahead and tells me what I need to do to grant that permission, which is nice. So if I wanted to go ahead and do that, I would do it. Of course, in my example, I'm not going to go past view only. So I would leave it as it is. Once again, I want to point you back to this documentation. It's going to help you overall with just understanding what's available and debugging some of the things that come up as you go. don't forget that you can create multiple roles. So if you wanted to do a test with your AP team, the best way will be, instead of overloading one role with all the permissions, you create a different role. You grant the permissions to allow it to connect to ChatGPT or Claude. And then in the AI application, you create a separate connection that you set up using that other role, and then you name it correctly. In that way, you can have different users testing in different roles and not just giving one blanket rule that covers everything. I didn't mention it at the beginning, but obviously you want to be doing this test against development accounts like the one I'm working in, or your sandbox account, because you don't want to expose your production data right away. Even though you have your role permissions restrictions, you still want to be careful and start with dummy data where possible. All right, at this point, you successfully configured a NetSuite account and connected to ChatGPT and Claude. So we've completed the basic configuration. Congratulations. However, I want to point you to some behind the scenes configuration that happened when we set up those connections and show you some extra options you have to control the integration. After that, I'll walk you through and answer a few questions that you might have as shown on this slide. But first, let's start with the integrations. When we connected NetSuite to ChatGPT and subsequently to Claude, something happened behind the scenes. And we will see that on the Setup Integration, Manage Integrations. The first time we connected and the first time any user connects these AI applications to your account, NetSuite will create what's called an integration record. We can see there's one here for ChatGPT and another one for Claude AI. This is really NetSuite's regular mechanism for connecting external systems into NetSuite. So if you're a developer or you're familiar with RESTlets work in the same way. An integration record is created that helps the external application connect to RESTlet and authenticate. And so it's not any different. NetSuite has only enhanced these records to support AI applications. And so if I open up one of them here, let's look at the ChatGPT one. There's a section here. There are a few options that have been added to support AI applications, particularly this scope, NetSuite AI Connector Service. This is something NetSuite has added to this record to allow us connect to AI applications. And so the good thing about ChatGPT and Claude connections is that these happened in the background and you didn't have to go in and create the records themselves. NetSuite did it for you and set the right redirection parameters, etc. So in a sense, you don't really have to worry about this. But if you were connecting some custom AI application you've built or a third-party one that is not supported right out of the box by NetSuite, you might need to come in here and set up these records. One thing I want to point you to in terms of configuration is the refresh token validity and the maximum time for token rotation. So something you're going to observe is that your connection from ChatGPT or Claude would expire after possibly 2 days or 7 days, depending on how much you've been interacting with the application. And that's governed by these parameters here. Without going too technical, these parameters really tell the application how often they need to refresh their access. So the refresh token tells the application how often it needs to go back and re-authenticate itself. And this can happen in the background. It's set currently to 2 days by default. It's set to 2 days. And then the key one here is the maximum time for token rotation. As the help says, this says how long or determines how long a user remains authenticated before the system requires them to re-authenticate. It can go up to 30 days, but as you can see, it's set to 168 hours, which is 7 days. So that means if you let this the way it is, after 7 days, regardless of how often you're using the application, after 7 days, you get kicked out and the user would see that the connector in ChatGPT or Claude is now disconnected, and they'll have to click and go through, sign in again, and go past that process as we did at the first time. Now, 7 days is decent, but that could be annoying, especially if you're in test mode and you want to have a more persistent connection. Therefore, you can come in here and set this to the maximum, which will give you a 30-day window in which you can work before you get authenticated. Now, that's okay when you're doing things in test environment. As you go live to production, you want to be thinking about these. These are parameters, just like you have parameters that determine how long people stay logged into your NetSuite account. This is something you have to think about, and it would be tied to your IT policy in general, how often you want users to re-authenticate. Keeping it short means that you increase your security scope, because if users are forced to re-authenticate, so even if someone is not using the application and they will get quietly disconnected, and if their device got stolen or something in that process, then it makes it harder for someone else to come in. But again, these are just general IT considerations. The key thing I'm trying to illustrate is that you can play with these parameters and set them to the max just to give you freedom, some more freedom, I should say, while you're testing. All right, so that is the integration record. And it's good for you to know it's created in the background for you, and that you have a few options that you can set here. NetSuite also puts on some restrictions. For example, if I went in and said, never ask for the consent. You remember that screen that showed up and said, you're bringing your own LLM. Do you want to continue? Right after I logged in to NetSuite while setting up the connector. If you set it to never ask and try to save, NetSuite is going to tell you no, you have to at least ask once. So it allows you to set it up as always ask or ask the first time. So there are a few controls that have been set here. For example, you see also that there is a notion of a machine-to-machine grant, which basically allows OAuth to work in a way that two systems talk to each other without having a user going in. When you're connecting AI applications, as soon as you select this NetSuite AI connector scope, you are not allowed to do the machine-to-machine. So currently, NetSuite is forcing us to set up OAuth in such a way that a user has to go in and explicitly log in and accept that they want to connect the AI application. So these are all some security design choices NetSuite has put in place, and I think reasonable ones at this stage for us to control and safeguard what we're doing. That's all I want to say about integration record. The next thing I want to touch on are two other questions. One of them is, what happens if at some point I no longer want ChatGPT or Claude to be connected to my NetSuite account, right? This could be because you don't want anybody to connect, or because you don't want certain users to connect. So we're going to look at those two options separately. Suppose I don't want anybody to connect ChatGPT. So we set up the connection. We know that we have people out in the field testing, but for whatever reason, a new IT policy, and we're saying, okay, ChatGPT is no more supported in our environment, or whatever it is, right? You get the idea. To completely disconnect or prevent anyone to connect to the account, to connect ChatGPT into your NetSuite account, you simply come into this integration record state and change it to blocked. Once you do that, everyone would stop having access to your account via ChatGPT, and that way you kind of provide a global block to the application. So that's something you can do. You can do this with all integrations, RESTlet, etc. So this is just, again, standard NetSuite as it worked before AI. That's one option you have. But what if you said, well, I want to see which users are connected. Maybe I've rolled this out to one or two users to multiple users over time, and now you're not quite sure who has access, and you want to trim that down. There is a different area where you can go in and control user-based access, and that's under Setup, Users and Roles. And then here you have OAuth 2.0 authorized applications. If we navigate to that page, what you see here is, there you go. We have some RESTlets, which we've worked with in the past, but then you see these MCP ones. These are the ones you care about. What it shows here now is which users have access, what applications they have access to, and when they got connected. So you can see that and also what role they got connected with. So you can see that I'm connected ChatGPT and Claude using the Prerequisites AI connector AP role, which we created earlier on. So in that way, you can get a full audit trail of who has access to the account right now, and you can go in, and if you needed to, you can revoke that access. And so if I did this now, I wouldn't do it, but if I did this, my ChatGPT connection will get revoked. But if someone else had connection and I didn't revoke theirs, they will still be able to connect. So in this way, the NetSuite administrator has some more control over who has access and what they're doing. I didn't mention that, but also under the integration records, one of the standard things you see is the execution logs, which will show the calls that have been made in. So you can leverage the standard NetSuite audit trail mechanisms to see what's happening with your AI applications and basically control who has access. Another question you might have on your mind is, well, why ChatGPT and Claude? Why can I connect something else? The answer is yes. That's the short answer. The reality is that currently NetSuite supports ChatGPT and Claude, I could say out of the box. That means they've made that configuration easier for you. You can go in, create the custom connector like we did, and connect without worrying about creating an integration record and all of the technicalities. However, any system that supports the MCP, which is the Model Context Protocol, is able to connect to NetSuite in theory. Therefore, you should be able to connect your Grok, you should be able to connect your Gemini or other applications, including your homegrown ones. However, you would have to consult the documentation of those applications to see how to go about setting up the connection. So for example, today, as at the time I'm recording this video, Gemini doesn't have easy options where we can create custom connectors like we did in ChatGPT and Claude. However, you can go through a command line interface, which is a more developer oriented approach to connect your Gemini to NetSuite. There are also other ways you can do this. For example, for developers who are using VS Code, which is a coding integrated development environment, an IDE, you can go that route and use VS Code and what is offered there to connect to multiple AI agents. Now, these solutions are not geared for the regular end user NetSuite admin kind of person, but developers can go that route to make connections. I want to highlight one more tool that is out there created by someone in NetSuite community, and shout out to Caleb for this tool. He has created what he's calling the OpenSuite MCP client. Now, this tool uses a combination of open source technologies to allow you to connect NetSuite to a couple of AI applications. Currently, as far as I can tell from documentation and initial tests we did, during initial tests, we were able to connect ChatGPT. I think that's the one we focused on testing, but the documentation here suggests that you're able to connect ChatGPT, so the OpenAI models, ChatGPT, Claude, and Google Gemini. So if you're looking just to connect, Google Gemini in addition to these two NetSuite support, this could be a way to go. They list the steps that need to happen here quite clearly, so you can follow these steps and get connected. One of the things you'd notice in the connection steps is that you have to go in and create your integration. There you go. You have to create integration yourself because it's not going to be created for you automatically. That's a bit of the difference between the ones NetSuite supports out of the box and the ones that are not direct supported. You'd have to do extra steps. Now, like any other tool, I mean, while I'm highlighting this tool, you have to go through it. The code is there. You have to vet it as you would vet anything else. So don't take it as though this is recommended per se. I'm just pointing it out there that, this tool is out there and we've had success connecting to it. It does also illustrate some patterns. So if you're more of a developer and trying to understand how to, let's say, build your own chat AI application, it does, show a pattern that is quite decent and you can build upon. So definitely worth checking out if you're a developer, but there's so much out there. This space is continuously, evolving, and I'm sure by the time you're watching this video, there might be some other tool, some other way. And in due course, we expect that the big providers like Google and the Gemini suite would gradually get added to the NetSuite configuration once NetSuite gets to the point where, the provider gives them enough to allow them make the connection easier. So I expect that in the coming weeks and months, we're going to see more connectors that have a quick, point and click solution with NetSuite. However, if you want to just get things going quickly, you have all these other options that get you to connect beyond what NetSuite offers you today. The key thing is to remember that MCP is a protocol that is beyond NetSuite. It is really a protocol for all AI applications and all systems that are willing to interact in that way. And so as soon as applications get built and as soon as they support MCP, you technically can connect them to NetSuite. You might just need to do extra work. All right, that wraps up our tutorial on how to connect NetSuite to ChatGPT and Claude. I hope you found this insightful and you were able to follow through along the steps. Here and there, I went into some more detail and gave you some more background with the intention of clarifying what we're trying to do here. I remember a few weeks ago when I tried to get my connection set up, despite the years of NetSuite experience, it was a bit tricky at some points to navigate the steps. And so I hope that this tutorial helps you clarify some of those areas and helps you avoid the issues I ran into at first. Now, this is just one piece of the puzzle. There's much more content that I look forward to producing in the coming weeks and months. For example, we've only covered the standard MCP tools which NetSuite offers out of the box. However, there is a whole domain that allows us to create custom tools. You need some development knowledge there, but to create custom tools that even accelerate your integration and allow you to build more complex, more focused applications that are specific to your use cases. I look forward to covering that in the future. Perhaps you have other topics that you'd like us to talk about around AI. Feel free to comment. I can't promise that I'm going to pick them all up and work on them, but I'd like to know where you're struggling so we can provide guidance. Of course, if you're not subscribed yet to the Prolecto YouTube channel, I highly recommend you do so. We provide valuable content that helps your NetSuite journey. And so go ahead and subscribe and set up that notification alert system so that you can get notified when we create new content. The same goes for the blog. Head to blog.prolecto.com, and if you're not yet subscribed, put in your email address. We take your privacy very carefully, and we're only going to provide you content that we find relevant, primarily our weekly blog article notifications. So go ahead and subscribe to our channel so that you're in the know. Like I always say, sharing is caring. And so if you found this useful, share it with someone in your community, with someone that needs to know, someone who might be struggling with the same things, so that we get a wider reach and we help the community grow in that way. I thank you for watching, and I thank you for your support, and I hope to see you next time. Take care.
We hope you found these insights helpful. If you're ready to get more out of your NetSuite investment and unlock untapped potential in your business, start your journey with Prolecto. Contact us today.